You're listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast with Jody Livingston and Chris Trent, episode number 77.
Dun, 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 dun.
Welcome to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, helping you survive and thrive in youth ministry. And now, your hosts, Jody Livingston and Chris Trent.
Ice, Jody.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Hey, middle school, man, I had little lines shaved inside of my head. That's back when I had hair.
Did you really?
Heck yeah, I did.
That's true.
Welcome to the show, everybody. It's good to have you here. We especially want to welcome you if you're a new listener, if it's your first time checking out the show. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for making this episode today a part of your day. If you are a returning listener, part of the Longer Haul community, man, thanks for hanging in there. And, well, thanks for coming on back. All of the links, resources that we might mention today will be on the show notes page, thelongerhaul.com/episode 077. Make sure you subscribe to the show so you get this. And share it with somebody. So wherever you're listening, you can subscribe on iTunes. You can subscribe Google Play, on Spotify.
You lost your place in your little spiel, didn't you?
I did, man. You messed me up with the Ice Baby thing. I
don't even know where it came from, except that I am right in the middle of. I mean, we're only a couple days away from D now. I'm lucky I'm even getting to record this, I feel like. But
hey, you want to know something fun?
A little tired and crazy right now. So
I don't know if this makes me a cool dad or shameful, but my kids can sing every bit of Ice Baby.
That's actually pretty awesome, dude.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Every
so,
word.
Hey, that's Jody Livingston there on the other side, and I'm Chris Trent. We're a couple youth pastors from Atlanta, Georgia area, actually kind of in Marietta and Kennesaw area. And so, yeah.
Well, one of us is.
Yeah. Well, that they'd have to listen to previous episodes to find out what that's all about, but you're in good shape. But yeah, man, we just love students and both been doing it for a little while and love to do the podcast. A lot of times we're interviewing people. Today, we're not interviewing anybody. We've got a topic we want to cover, but we do have a couple great interviews coming up that we're in the process of scheduling. But thanks for hanging out, man. We're glad to have you guys.
Absolutely. You can find us on social media at Jody Livingston, Jody Y, Chris Trent, all over wherever that is. Of course, over on the Facebook, the Longer Haul. And we do have the super secret podcast group that you can, on Facebook, that you can join or request to join. It's a great group of folks, man. And from all over. So cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
So cool. So, if you were around, or if you've been listening and you listened to if you haven't listened to the last episode, you should probably start there. Is that fair to say? 76?
Yeah. You really in relation to today's episode? Yeah.
So this is like part two.
It'd be like almost a part two. We didn't call the first part, but then we decided to follow up with this. Yeah. I think it's good. Yeah. So it might be worth hitting pause and going back and listening to the first episode. But, but if you just saw the title about how to find a new job, new gig, and it was appealing to you,
you can listen.
Whatever, man.
Yeah, you'll be fine, but it'd be good to know. So today, in the last episode, we talked about reasons to leave. So if you're struggling, you're in a spot, that was episode 76. And today we're talking about finding a new place. Yeah. And I know this probably feels a little weird because we've not really done this before. I mean, there's been some stuff written about, why to leave and those kind of things, but we are the Longer Haul, right? So why would we cover this?
Because we are the realists, and we're realistic Longer Haul people, which means we know that people make changes, man. There are changes in the midst of that, and again, we always talk about the Longer Haul in two ways. One, in your experiencing the Longer Haul in your current position, but we also talk about it, long term as a career, how to experience that. And realistically, we know that most youth pastors, not all, but most experience at least a couple.
Yeah, sure.
Churches and things happen, things happen, cause change. So, hey, before we jump in, let's not forget to mention our amazing sponsor, YM360. That's Youth Ministry
We love
360.
those guys.
Let me tell you something really cool about YM360, Jody, that's current for me. I've got like 4 or 5 two people that are literally on staff with them that work in Birmingham. These 2 gals that work in the office and do camp planning and administrative type stuff and help with all kinds of details. They found out about our D now, and they're coming and leading this weekend because they love students. I'm not kidding. And then we've got like 3 former camp staffers as well that are coming in doing RD now. So these folks, and I say that to only say this, they get youth ministry, and yes, they're a business. Yes, they're selling curriculum and selling a product as far as camp and all the different books and everything that they're doing. But ultimately, these are people that really, really love teenagers. And so you can trust them with your stuff. They want to help you out. So if you're in the market for some curriculum, or you need to go to camp, or any of those type of things, just go on their website, check them out. Really good stuff. And I also highly recommend, currently, if you happen to be listening to this in real time, their current Christmas devotional book is just off the chain. I mean, it is just so good.
And it sells out every year.
It legitimately sells out every year. It's an Advent book, and it's worth your time. So consider that. But yeah, there we go.
So check those guys out, ym360.com. Be sure to use the promo code Longer Haul. Save 20% off your order, although not camp. We've established that.
Yeah, we've established that for real.
But I still think they should try. Just to see. Just to see. So yeah, we love those guys. Make sure you check them out for sure. All right. Are we ready?
I am ready. Yes, let's do it.
Okay. All right, here we go.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
Okay, so like we said, the last episode was kind of evaluating reasons to leave, why to leave, and we even talked a little bit about how to leave in that regard. And so kind of following up this week with finding your next thing.
Yeah, because Jody, Jody announced last week, he made it officially kind of public or whatever, that he's left his position as a youth pastor. And this has been a long going process. So he's been in the process for a while now of trying to find, a new gig, and looks like there's some great opportunities on the horizon there for sure. But you definitely can speak heavily to that. And that's why I love the idea of you kind of leading out on a lot of this and saying, hey, here are some of the things, that you've been dealing with fresh. As we think, because there are bound to be some folks out there that are dealing with the same type of thing, or will at some point, and they're looking, but they're listening back to this episode, because they're in the process of trying to find a new gig. And we both have been in this position before. I've been in that position before, and have had to go through the whole interview process. And I've talked with a lot of people before about it, and you're living it right now. So, what are you learning there, brother?
Living the dream. Yeah. So I think there's 2 things, or one thing I'll say off the front. There's kind of 2 scenarios where this breaks out. One is, and most often I think we see people kind of find the next spot before they leave the previous spot, right?
Correct.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that either, necessarily. In fact, I would say it's probably much easier to find your next place when you are someplace. That's not how I chose to do that, and that, just the way it worked out.
Yeah, but I think most of the things you're going to talk about apply either way, right?
Yeah, they apply either way. Yep. So I say that to say I'm not advocating one way or the other, or just because we decided to step out first and then really heavily start looking, that I'm like judging. For us, for me, I wanted to be able to devote my full attention to one or the other, and I felt like I'd be divided. And so we really ramped up the search kind of after announcing. So yeah, there are I think there are a lot of things, and I'll say this too. What's been interesting for me is there's been a lot of. It's amazing how many things have changed since the last time, because we were where we were for almost 9 years. Man, tons. Like the advancing of technology has drastically changed how the search process looks and works, which has been fascinating.
It seems to run on some type of electricity.
That's right. That's right. So that's been good. So I would say first, there's a couple of things I think that's really important first. One is you need to recognize that depending on your circumstance of why you're leaving, you may be leaving pretty wounded, and I would even almost say you're kind of always leaving wounded a little, to a certain degree, but depending on the circumstances and how that you may be leaving with some pretty deep wounds, and that may mean that you need to take some time and kind of allow yourself to heal from that a bit before jumping into something else. I think that's something you need to recognize and avoid putting yourself in a spot where, man, if you're really busted up and hurt, stepping into another role may not be the best thing immediately for you, and not taking some time to process that. I think that happens more often than we are willing to admit. And you may be stepping out in a really healthy spot too. So it just depends. But I think recognizing that, there may be some hurt here that you have to work through would be really good. The other thing is, I think you're going to find yourself wrestling with, especially if you find yourself with a gap, right? So like kind of where I've been, where you're not really, and it hasn't been a long gap for us, but just wrestling with your identity for how many years. For me, okay, I'll speak to me personally. I've been a student pastor, and with very little gaps in between over the last almost 20 years, and so what it's caused me to do is, man, okay, really stop and evaluate and wrestle through that, because I think unknowingly, me being a youth pastor became so core, like such a part of my identity. And not that it's not, but I think like if you go back to the episode with Todd Jones, right? We just had him on and talking about identity, and particularly talking about, there's a lot of things there. He talks about labels and different things like that. I think for me, maybe that's something I didn't quite realize. So it's been really good, man. It's been so good for me and healthy to stop and say, yeah, okay, you're a student pastor, but you're more than that, right? You know, who I am as a believer, as a husband, as a father, as a dad, so I think that's good. I think you take some time to wrestle through and establish that. That's something I've really kind of wrestled with and walked through in such a good way. And the Lord has just been so good in that. So there's that. And then the last thing I'll say off the front here is, I think you need to take some time to evaluate and revisit your calling, and recognize that the calling on your life is ultimately what qualifies you in ministry. And so regardless of, what your circumstances may or may not have been, and even in my case, like having to circle back to that. Is this still what God has called me to do? And, absolutely. I mean, for a million reasons, but I think you've got to be confident in your calling. If you're wavering on your identity and you're not quite sure of that, and you haven't recognized that you're wounded and you're working through that, and you're unsure in your calling, you're gonna have a really difficult time going through a process and any type of interview process with any churches, because you're just going to be really insecure and not confident, and you're going to be reading into everything and making excuses for things that there's nothing to make excuses for. And I'm sure you've seen that. I've seen that in a ton of people over the years. So I think those three, for me, I would say off the front, are really key.
Yeah, so I hear you saying, Jody, that whenever you reach a moment where you're like, oh man, I have to find a new job. We were joking about how we could call this how to find a new gig. Whenever you hit that moment where you realize, it's time, that before you really start the process, and I know you're probably about to jump into the like, okay, well, what do you do first to find a new job, a new youth ministry position? Let's talk about what we're actually talking about. You're saying it's key to do a gut check first and really do a personal evaluation. And that's what I hear you saying, which I agree with 100%, man. I think that's huge because I think going forward, that's going to help you determine where to go and who to talk to and what type of position you want and what you're willing to take and not take and all of that. And it's important not to just jump into something too quick. So yeah, man. So how did you start whenever you hit that moment where you're like, okay, I'm going to start looking? What is that? What are some things you had to do in order to find somewhere?
Yeah. So I think for us, it started with just talking to folks that we knew, and asking, like people who knew me and who would potentially know of others. And so just reaching out to folks saying, hey, we're stepping away. We're not really sure what's next. We're still wanting to stay in student ministry. We feel confident in that calling and who we are. If you know of anything, let us know. And so initially, we heard from, then folks started passing some things along.
So hypothetically, if you happen to record a podcast with another guy who
may or may not know some other people,
you should call that guy and say, hey,
you'd
man.
mention it to him.
You'd mention him. Yeah. I'm just saying. Okay, I got you.
Yeah. Actually, let me back up. So probably the very first thing to do, if you haven't done so, would be to put together your resume. And that is a whole nother episode and topic.
Yeah. Okay. Well, can I jump in there let me just tell you. So I'm in the opposite where I've been trying to hire. We just hired a middle school associate, and I'm also in the process of working for an assistant, looking for an assistant as well. And dude, I'm going to tell you, your resume, it needs to be solid. It's worth, if I get a resume that's got like a typo on it, I'm just like, dude, I don't want to work with you. I know that sounds terrible, but I'm like, yeah, this is not going to work out. Like the idea that you reached this point and are looking to try to work in, so I'm just saying, put the time in, find somebody.
Yeah. And usually there's somebody like that. There's somebody usually like if you're in school, man, they've got, if at a seminary or something like that, they've got resources there that can help you walk through that. There's tons of examples online. You can find somebody with your state or local, association or network can probably help you with that too. I would just say less is more on that. Like you don't want to give somebody a 10-page resume. For me, I know even when I'm hiring folks, like if it's more than 2, you lost me. You lost me at the second page. So outline what you're doing briefly. Make it. I think now the expectation is, from what I've seen, is that it would be, fairly modern in the sense that it's not just, a white sheet of paper with information on it, but there's some color to it. A really high quality, high definition picture, at least of you, if not your family, depending on which way you want to go on that. All those things are really, really important. And, but it needs to be clear from that. And I'll tell you a book that I'll throw out. And this, although it's not ministry specific, it's a fantastic book for kind of what we're talking about with resume stuff and examples. And that's the book by Dan Miller called 48 Days to the Work You Love. That's a great book, especially if you're like, when I was bivocational, man, I used that book like crazy when I had to find work. And I've given copies and copies and copies of that book away. But 48 Days to the Work You Love by Dan Miller is fantastic. And he has a whole section of online resources and samples and examples for you on different types of resumes. But I would get out there and look, again, I don't want to make this all about the resume, but your resume has to be sharp, and it needs to be, like you said, I think, you need to go through that and proofread that thing 1 billion times, have other people look at it.
Yeah. And that's honestly where, and that's where nobody's done this before, but, potentially you could utilize like a Longer Haul Podcast Facebook group to maybe say, and I don't know that I would post it just outright on there, but you could say, hey, I'm looking for someone to give me some feedback. If that's something you feel like you're pretty good at, would you be open to me sending you a copy?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, for
again,
sure.
just do your homework. Yeah. All right. What else?
For sure. So I think good resume, and then obviously reach out to friends. From there, there's tons of there's tons of listings online that you can find. So what is it, churchstaffing.com. I mean, you can just Google almost youth ministry job postings and they'll come up everywhere. Most state levels are going to have some stuff. You may even find some stuff in your local kind of network or associations. And then I think you need to do a lot of homework before you just up and send stuff. So most job descriptions for youth ministry especially are not very specific, and at least the ones that I found. And so, having to kind of go and look at the church website, figure out what is it they do, look at their calendar, if they have their youth ministry event calendar posted, so you can kind of see what their expectations are there, when and how often they meet. If there's some Facebook stuff, and you can look on their Facebook page too. Just do your homework on that. You obviously want to make sure you line up doctrinally, theologically on those. And then if you feel like, it might be a good fit or good opportunity, then you need to find out who to contact. And I think that's really important. Don't just send it to just anybody. And usually if you're finding it on a job posting, it'll tell you who to contact. And so, sometimes depending on your denomination affiliation, whatever that looks like, sometimes that's a search committee. There's a chairman of a search committee. Sometimes it's an executive pastor or somebody like that. It just depends. But getting it to the right person is really key. And then I think one thing from there that no one seems to ever do is follow up. And so I found that once the resume was sent, about a week later, if I hadn't heard anything, that I would follow up with just an email or a phone call. If I could figure out if it's somebody at the church, I may call, but at least an email, just following up that, hey, I sent my resume. Just wanted to make sure, confirm that it was received, and that kind of thing was helpful. Another option, another place to look. There are some search firms out there that kind of help with church staffing. So, and I actually have worked with both of the ones. There's a bunch out there. I did work with a couple. One was Vanderblumen. I think they're based out of Texas. And so Vanderblumen, all of these are the same or similar, but they have job postings on there for positions, churches that are looking for positions. And then you can upload and submit your resume to their site. And then what they do in this case is they have folks who are kind of working alongside the church at helping them identify from a large pool of candidates, kind of narrow down and then present candidates to the church to consider. And so, you would send that. They would, if they feel like you're a good fit, then they'll contact you. But you can submit your resume to those and build out profiles on these, even without like a specific thing in mind. And if something comes up and they feel like you're a good fit, then they may reach out to you. So Vanderblumen is one of them. The other one, which is actually the one I've worked probably most closely with, is called Slingshot. The Slingshot Group. They're based out of California, I believe. And both are great. Personally, I enjoyed working with the Slingshot folks a lot. And they seem to kind of communicate really well in-house with their team. And hey, maybe I was talking to this person about this position, but they mentioned somebody in the office mentioned they were looking for somebody for this, and they suggested, hey, he may be a good fit there. So that's another option is looking at those. And really, I don't know that it's a one size fits all. I think in my case, I've done them all, right? I mean, I've submitted it anywhere and everywhere, and then just trying to prayerfully walk through what that looks like. And even with those search firms, again, I'm doing that same research of okay, they're going to have a profile on there that kind of gives you an overview of what the church looks like and what the position looks like. But then, okay, I'm going to check out the church's website. I'm going to look on their, social media stuff and try to find an event calendar or something like that, doctrinal theological positions, structure, if I can figure out what that looks, and make sure, philosophically it lines up well. Obviously, theologically it lines up well. And they allow you as well to restrict kind of the region. So if you're saying, "Oh, I don't want to leave this area," you can do that. We chose not to do that because we really just wanted to put a blank check and put our yes on the table and see where that was going to lead us to. And I'm grateful we've done that. I mean, it's been incredible. Yeah, so those are the big places that I would suggest as well. And
That's cool.
I'm not sure. I haven't looked.
I never
but
did
know,
that whole process, but that sounds like a pretty good deal.
Well, it's been totally new for me because really up until this point, every position I've had, I was approached when I wasn't really looking. And so I've never really had to go through the search process. That's been really, really new. So those are the big ones. And I know like YS used to have job posting boards. I'm sure they still do. And a lot of seminaries will as well.
Yeah, they definitely do. I mean, I think that stuff's out there. I think you can find, postings like that for sure. And yeah, it's good. Yeah.
So, let me keep going. I keep going. Or you got questions?
No, these are good, man. No, I'm digging in, just listening. I told you I've got a list of things to avoid here in a little bit in the process as well. I'm the negative Nancy guy here.
So, then what I would say is, and this is what's been interesting. So what follows, what the process that I've walked through. So I'm going to speak. Let me say this. I understand that a lot of our listeners have gone through this process, and many of them have probably done it multiple times. Okay. I'm not going to make assumptions that that's happened though. Okay. Because I do know some of our listeners, because we talk to them, are still just starting this for the first time. They're looking at this first time. And particularly this episode, I think because of the subject matter, is probably likely to get some really new, fresh, like looking for their first position. Okay. So, let me say that. So let me talk about like once the church contacts you, okay, what does that look like? And it's hard to say. I'm going to make some generalizations, but what I found is that every church does it differently. There's not like a set way. A lot of times, almost every time though, there's going to be some type of questionnaire. Now, if you go on to like the Slingshot group, for example, and you fill out a profile there, they have their own questionnaire that they're going to have you do as part of that profile. So you'll fill out those questionnaires, and it's going to take some time to do it and do it well. So it's not like a 30-second deal. I mean, it's going to take a while to do that, but it helps them understand you better and helps them find a better fit for you. But even if you're not going through kind of one of the search firms, you can you're most likely going to get some type of questionnaire from the church. And it's interesting because what I found, and I'm sure you've done this or seen this as well or sent these out, you can kind of tell about quite a bit about the church or the ministry by the questions they ask.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell kind of like what the issues have been in the past or what the priorities are for the future in the ministry. And honestly, most of them, I didn't really get asked as far as like a lot of questionnaires that I've seen, they don't ask a lot of theological questions, which is a little scary. A lot of it's practical. What's your view on this? What's your position on this? What would you do in this situation? How would you do this? So the questionnaire, you'll fill those out depending on how long that is. You send that back, and then from there, it's if it goes forward, it's usually some type of interview. Now, I've had some over the phone interviews. I've had a lot of video interviews, which has been interesting. That's been new. So via Skype.
Dude, I'm about to interview somebody like that for the first time.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I mean, we do a lot of that, you and I, because of the podcast and different things. So I think I'm probably pretty comfortable. But if you're not,
I do it
comfortable
because
in
I'm photogenic.
well, you've got that cool hair. So here's
That was
some
a
tips
joke,
on that.
by the way. Could just be
You do have cool hair. I wasn't joking.
No, I was talking about me being photogenic part. That's a joke.
So let me say this: if you're doing a video interview, you need to take this serious. So just some tips: make sure that the lighting is decent, that you don't look like a serial killer, like with weird shadows. Dress professionally, at least from the waist up, what's in view of the screen. And I would make sure there's nothing distracting in the background. So try to be fairly professional in that, and in a quiet environment so you can easily hear or use some headphones or something like that. I think a lot of times those types of details, they go a long way in presenting yourself well, just like you would in a face-to-face. What's interesting about those is sometimes you're going to be able to see everybody on the screen, like when you're looking at, and sometimes if it's like a larger committee, you may only see like a few people from that. So you just never really know. Sometimes you hear voices off screen, but you don't really hear them. And then, if it's over the phone, obviously, sometimes that's a conference call. If it's a committee of people, or sometimes it's a one-on-one. And then if you continue, depending on how, sometimes there'll be a follow-up interview or two on that, and then and sometimes usually there's some type of interview initially before a face-to-face. So when you get to the face-to-face interview, then obviously you want to dress, appropriately, and that will vary, right? We had that conversation. I asked you that a few times, like, hey, okay, look at this church and tell me what you think. I would say if you're going to err on the side of overdressed, not underdressed. But usually if you can find, again, if you can find some pictures or if you can see the service or you can see something like that, you can get an idea of kind of what the standard quo is there, the status quo for dress. You should be able to line up well with that. But don't go in cargo shorts.
Yeah, don't go in cargo shorts. I mean, come on. Yeah. Seriously. Or shorts, period. I don't care what they say. Just don't do it.
Don't do it. No shorts. No shorts. So you will, I would say the face-to-face, make sure you dress professionally. You need to have some questions for them. And maybe we can talk about that because I know you get some really good questions. And obviously present yourself well there. So generally they're going to ask you all their questions, and then hopefully they'll ask if you have any. And I find if you do, it's good, and you should have some, but I think you present yourself well to have at least a few, 2 or 3 questions.
Well, and I tell you, I think it's important to have questions because it means that you've thought through what's going on, I mean, and it means that you're digging in. I just don't see how you can think about going somewhere if you're not asking questions about philosophy and what they're about and all those things, and part of it is just you being a good listener during the interview process and follow, even if it's a follow-up question. Hey, could you unpack that a little more for me? That was really interesting to me. I just think it's not a great moment when you say, hey, do you have any questions about us? And you go, no, I'm good. It just comes across as disinterested. But
so we'll give you some good gimme questions, right? That's what we're going to give them right now because you've got some good ones.
You go ahead. You're setting me up. I don't. You're putting me in a predicament.
So here's the questions. There's some questions I always ask. I always ask, what does success look like here? And I give them some benchmarks. So like 90 days, and then I like to say 2 years.
Sure.
Okay. If I was your student pastor, what, and I was being successful after 90 days, what would that look like?
Yeah.
And then I would say, okay, if I'm your student pastor and I'm successful after 2 years, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And the 2-year one really gives, the 90-day gives you an idea of expectations early. And then the 2-year gives you kind of like, this is what we want the ministry to be. This is what I want you to be for us. So that one, I like to ask them, especially if I'm interviewing with the person who will supervise me in any way, I like to ask them, tell me what frustrates you about people who work for you. Like if I were working for you and I did something that would frustrate you,
yeah,
what would that be?
that's one of the questions I like a lot is, hey, what would frustrate you? You know, like what would get people on this staff frustrated with me, or what would get you, pastor, what would get you angry, you know, with the way, you know, I do youth ministry, or I think that's a great question. I had somebody recently ask me specifically, you know, that would be, what would I have to do to really kind of get you angry with me, you know, or angry at the job that I was doing? And I was like,
Yeah,
dude, that's a great question. And then I proceeded to tell them, you know, but honestly, listen, man, it was such a refreshing moment though, because it allowed me to say, you know, hey, listen, you know, people that don't follow through, you know, for me, that's just a real deal breaker for me.
Yeah,
you
sure.
know, and so yeah, it was good. So,
yeah, I think 2 other questions that you and I have talked about through this too. One is the lunch question. So, hey, if I were to have a free lunch one day to go have lunch with somebody, would you rather me have lunch with students or with a leader?
yeah.
And I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer on that, depending on, I mean, I have my opinion on what I think that is. The best response I got to that, by the way, was awesome. Was, well, that depends on who you had lunch with the day before. I was like, ooh, touche. We will move along now. So that was great. And then the other question is, and again, these are more aimed at like a supervisor, but I think you could ask this in a larger context too. Like, do you take all of your does the pastor, really is who we're looking for here, does he take all of his vacation?
Yeah, and so let's be clear about that. I don't know that question is right out of the gate in the first interview.
No.
But in the process of interviewing, and if you get to that point where things are you're starting to talk about benefits and stuff, I think it's important to ask a couple questions related to that. One is, you know, what does your day off look? Do you take it? You know, because let me say, if you're going to a place and the pastor doesn't take his day off, there might be a culture there where nobody takes their day off, and guess what that means? That means you're not taking your day off.
You don't get to take it.
And then the other thing would be vacation. You know, if you're in a culture where, hey man, everybody here gets 4 weeks of vacation. Oh, really? How many weeks of vacation did everybody take? Oh, about a week and a half. Yeah,
right.
That could be a real that could impact everything, you know, as well. So yeah, those are good. But that, don't come out of the gate with that. Good night.
Oh yeah, don't lead with that. No, that's not a first interview question. That's a down the line. And then if I would say, you know, just be aware, you know, like even like Chris just said, like as they're saying things, follow-up questions are always really good. It shows that you're paying attention.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I take notes a lot. I walk in because I have kind of a list of questions. If you've got stuff or see stuff that you have questions about, I think have some, but not a ton for that first interview. If you walk in and you have more questions than they do, that's not good.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
But have some is really helpful. The big thing, here's something I will add that I feel like you should do, is if you're having after the interview, I'm a big proponent of this. Send a handwritten thank you note. And like in my case, if it's a face-to-face, I like to do that to everybody I met with, if possible. And I think I was actually told in this whole process by a guy who's been an executive pastor in a ministry for, probably 20 years, that I was the first person in 20 years that ever sent a thank you card.
That sounds like an opportunity to me, is what that sounds like.
That's what I'm saying. It sets you apart immediately. And that's the thing. Most people aren't going to follow up, and most people aren't going to send a thank you. And so it's not trying to manipulate. It's just trying to like show gratitude and be noticed, little things like that, man, make a huge statement. So if you hear anything I'm saying, that's a big,
man,
that's a big takeaway.
It's good.
And then from there, if it continues to progress well, generally they'll kind of lay out what the compensation and benefits, if they're, what that would look like. And you got to figure out if that would work and not. And I'll say this, you can probably negotiate that in most contexts more than you think you can. Not always. But if you feel like you need to, then don't be afraid to at least pose that. I wouldn't do it just to do it, but don't be afraid to if you need to. And especially if you feel like, man, this is really the direction that God's leading you. Obviously, throughout the process, you want to be really prayerful. But I think those are, if you're moving, you need to factor in like, okay, if we're moving, are you going to help with the moving costs? Right? Because if you get a job, maybe you can afford to work there, but you can't afford to get there. That's a problem. And so those are just details you work out, again, not in the initial interview, but down the road. And I think if you're mindful of that and you kind of ask good questions along the way, and I think you probably have a pretty good gauge, and then you have to be okay with a no. I mean, that's the hard, especially if you're, like I started out, right? If you're coming a bit wounded and you got some insecurities coming out of a spot, and then you're pursuing something and you're told no, even if deep down you feel like this isn't a good fit, if they come back with a no, sometimes you can take that really personally. It almost seems to like affirm the wound and that identity. And that's not what's happening. Most likely. So just be okay with seeking out what is it that God has, and finding the right place and not just a place, I think is really important.
Huge.
Too.
It's all good stuff, man. Good stuff. How much more you got there on that?
Yeah.
You ready for some things to avoid?
No, I'm good. You've got things to avoid, yeah?
Oh, I definitely have some things to avoid
to
think through. And obviously, I'm not living through this right now. I've been in the same place for 14 years. And it's been a while since I've had to go through the process. But I do find myself in moments where I'm sitting across the table from people at lunch or having coffee with folks that are going through this process. And so I've had to process this over the years. I'll tell you a couple things that come to my mind, about 5 things. Surprise. First thing is, number one is this might be the biggest one, is settling. When you're out there looking for a new job, settling, meaning just taking the first thing that comes your way, and settling for, a bad situation, I just would be careful, and I would try to avoid that at all costs, even in the midst of hard times and challenging times. You could end up making things way worse for yourself, and you could also end up creating and stepping into your last ministry gig because you leave one spot for another. And so I would just be really careful about settling for something just to get a new job, so that'd be one thing.
Yeah, no, totally. That's hard. That's harder than you think.
I'm not saying it's easy. I say it was easy.
I mean, so I think,
but just be careful. It just, slow your roll. I'm just saying. Yeah. I would say number 2, I would just, this is a potential. Okay. This is more of a caution rather than a completely avoid. But when it comes to leaving your denomination, I would just say proceed with caution, because depending on your denomination, that could impact potentially you getting back into that. And I think that's true for multiple denominations. And I would say also related to that is there are certain denominations have, depending on what denomination you and traditions you have, you may find things that are conflicting with, your, I guess, beliefs is probably too strong of a word, but things that you value
Like your
greatly,
convictions.
your convictions. So it would just be something to just consider, and again, avoid settling for a new gig, just to get a new gig whenever you're potentially going somewhere where you don't necessarily agree with, I don't know, the way they do baptism or something. I don't know what that might be.
Right.
Yeah. It's just,
Yeah, and some of those things you may think, oh, this isn't a closed-handed issue. This is an open-handed issue. But then you end up in there and you're maybe not 100% on board with that, or you're kind of softly teaching even maybe something different, and that can cause trouble later on.
yeah, man, big time.
That's a good word.
So number 3 would be just things to avoid when you're looking for a new position would be leaving an unhealthy position and going right into another unhealthy position.
Yeah.
So just that's where you have to again slow that roll, slow your roll, and do your homework and figure out what the heck's happening in that church. You should be able to get in. You should be able to dig in and have enough perception over time talking to these folks, different folks, and asking the right questions and getting to know people. Especially, just digging into the history of youth ministry. What's it been like? What are some things that have been great? What are some things that have been not great? In any moment, typically you're going to also find a parent that's willing to really dump on you, or a kid that's really going to be able to dump some information on you as far as like, hey, what do you like about youth ministry? Hey, what are some things that have been hard over the years? That's a really healthy question right there. And, but again, just if you're in a unhealthy situation and it's causing you to look for a new gig, just be careful not to, again, that's almost a little part of that settling. Just be careful not to get into another unhealthy situation there.
Yeah, it's good.
Tied to that a little bit would be number 4, which is avoid following someone or multiple someones who have not worked out. So if you're going to a place or thinking about going to a new place and they have this legacy over the last 5 years, they've gone through 3 youth pastors. I would just say that there really needs to be a pretty significant burning bush moment that would say to you that you are the chosen one that's going to be different than the other 3 that have been sacrificed on the altar of youth ministry. Because odds are you're not going to be that person. Odds are you're going to be the person that sticks around another year and a half, 2 years, because there's something unhealthy about what's going on there. So I would just say avoid following someone or multiple someones who have not worked out. And at least make sure you're clarifying what's happening there. I think that's huge. And then finally, you touched on this, a little bit, Jody, is you have to avoid getting beat down when you're told no. I'm good at telling people no. Again, it's not like it's a huge secret. The church I serve at's kind of a larger gig, and as a result of that, I've just been in a process where I've had to hire people, and I've had to sit through and interview people. And it often, it is not personal most of the time. Well, it's never really personal anyway, but typically it is just because it's just not the right fit, or you're just not quite the right person. And I'll tell you, Jody, most of the time I'm trying to spare you future problems and me future problems when I tell you no.
Yeah.
And,
sure.
And so, try not to get beat down when you're told no. And I'm not saying that's easy, but I'm saying, man, trust the process and trust God's timing, in that as well. Again, I know it's hard. I know, man, when your family's dependent on money and paychecks and health and all, I know it's hard, but don't create another problem by getting just so beat down that it ends up causing you to make some of these other mistakes because you're just getting told no over and over again. Just so and don't also feel like, oh, well, I must not be called to ministry just because I keep getting told no, now, if you get told no 10 times, it might be worth having a conversation with somebody and going, okay, what am I missing here? What's happening? What is there something to this?
Or
But
you may just really be a crappy interviewer, like interviewee.
yeah, and so I'm just saying, try not to get beat down though. Try not to get beat down and try to stay the course and realize that, that wilderness that, God has you in may be the best place for you. And, Jody, I look forward to hearing more of your story even later on in a future podcast, and I've obviously got a little bit of inside information about potentially where things are probably headed and stuff. And, but I look forward to hearing and folks being blessed with that, because you were told no a few times. You've been told no a couple times, and
oh, sure.
I told you no. I'm just kidding. I tell you.
I couldn't even qualify to be your assistant.
My ministry assistant position opened up, I was like, hey, Jody, I got to get
and here's what I'll say too. And look, this is something that we've talked about when we talk about recruiting volunteers, is that sometimes you can have an amazing individual with incredible gifts and talents who would just absolutely destroy the chemistry of the rest of the team. And so you may be amazingly qualified to be a youth pastor, but the chemistry aspect of the team just wouldn't play well. And so you could be told for a number of reasons, and most of them are probably not, we just think you really suck at being a youth pastor. It's rarely that, right? It's just, it's fit, it's philosophy, it's chemistry.
Yeah.
So don't, you have to fight for that for sure and make sure you don't take that personal. That's good. Hey, let me ask you this. What about this scenario?
Yep.
What about a scenario where the church is currently without senior leadership, like senior pastor?
Yeah. So I both typically are kind of folks that we try not to deal in. I mean, obviously we believe spiritually there are absolutes, no doubt. When it comes to these type of decisions, it's hard to, is there an absolute answer for that? What I would say is there's at least a moment of caution and red flag.
Yeah. Sure.
Where you have to at least say, okay, I really need to dig into this and find out what the plan is and why are they wanting to do this. There's a dozen different potentially scenarios that we could be talking about here. So I would say I wouldn't say that it's like an automatic, no way, I'd never do that, because I don't know that that's true, but I would say that it would be at least a moment where I would pause and go, tell me a little more about that. Tell me a little more about what's going on there. What's the plan? Who makes the decisions? Is this a deacon-led gig, or is this an elder-led gig, or is this a personnel deal? And where did the senior leadership go? Are we talking about a guy who had been there for 30 years and he just retired? And are we talking about a guy who was one of the last three pastors in 15 years? So
right.
So, and when the previous pastor came, how did he respond to new people? Did anybody get let go automatically? Is there a culture of that? So you just have to really dig into that and find out what the plan is. But yeah, ultimately, Jody, here's the advice I would give to folks. Again, as a guy who's just out there in the process, I do hire people from time to time, and I talk to people. I would just say this: youth ministers notoriously are not very professional. And I'm not ripping on everybody on this. I'm not trying to say, but I'm just saying. And I had a guy show up in shorts one time to an interview, and I was like, can we just save you and me time and say we're done? I wanted to, but I sat through the process because it was Chick-fil-A. That guy may be listening too. He's a great guy, and he ended up at an awesome place, and he's doing a great job. If you happen to be listening and put two and two together, but showing up in shorts wasn't your best call. So that's, it just wasn't right. I'm just being honest. All I'm saying, listen. Here's what I'm saying.
That's awesome.
The reason I'm saying this is when you're 25 years old, and I'm not ripping on 25-year-olds.
Yeah,
No, I'm not. I'm really not. And you're just getting into this whole stuff. Man, you're like, everything's kind of like, yeah, man, fly. We're just loving Jesus so much. And just whatever, man, wherever the Lord leads. I'm like, okay, that's great. I'm just saying, this is potentially one of the biggest decisions and the most impactful decisions on you, your family, your wife, your spouse, your kids, everything.
Yeah.
The future of you, all that. It is worth becoming an expert at this whole process. Work on your skill set. Work on presenting yourself well. Work on understanding cost of living, resumes, how to interview well, how to dress in the appropriate place for where you're in, all those things. Do your homework, do your job, and become great at it, you know? And I don't say that to take Jesus out of it. I say that because you are following Jesus, do your best. That's what I'm saying. You know, go out there and do your best. And it's not for everybody. And I understand that. And there may be some folks out here, you know, and they're content to just, and that's fine. And I don't knock that. And I'm just saying that there's something to say, though, about if we already as youth pastors aren't always taken very serious, let's not step into an interview and affirm that in whoever's interviewing, you know, us, you know.
Well, you need trust in student ministry. You need trust to be effective. And that starts from the beginning. They're not going to hire somebody they don't think they can trust.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Cool.
So,
all right, brother. That's good, man. That's good. Hey, folks, so if you're listening, man, we're praying that if you are in that process, praying that you'll make we should add that, Jody. Like right now, I wouldn't. That's a shame on us for not putting this down, but I mean, and I think it's probably you and I both would probably just think that it would be natural, but seriously, pray. I mean, just pray.
Absolutely.
Pray a lot. Pray for wisdom. Pray for stamina in the process. Pray for all those, and pray that God will lead you to the right gig. You know, and
talk. If you're married, you got to talk that through, man, with your spouse. Yeah. Like, I know, like for my wife and I, for Sarah and I, we of course we got 4 kids, so our house is always a bit of a chaotic scene. So we talk a lot when we walk the dog. And man, I'm gonna tell you something. That dog's in the best shape of her life. We walk that thing. She gets walked all day long. But yeah, I mean, you got to make sure you're on the same page.
I can't walk my dog. I got a little tiny dog. That's a little squatty dog. She can walk about to the mailbox and back before she's worn out.
Yeah,
so
that's funny. Yeah. So
hey, thanks for listening. And if you need us, really find us on Facebook and reach out to us, and we'll try to help you if you need to talk through something. I really am Jody, I know you are as well. It's not like we have tons and tons of time on our hands, but if you ever need somebody to talk to, just reach out to either one of us, and we will be happy to set up a time and just chat through some stuff, you know. Yeah. And we're not going to charge you money for it. You know, we're not. It's not going to be a deal where it's like, oh yeah, we will. You know, I mean, no, man. Listen, Jody and I are the product of other people investing in us, and we're happy to pass that along. So
absolutely, yep, awesome. So jump in the Facebook group if you're not there already. Yep. Be sure to head over to ym360.com and check out those guys.
60. They need a jingle so bad. Could I write their jingle?
You'd have to ask them. I can't get permission for that. Use the promo Longer Haul, save 20%. Grab that devotional, that Christmas devotional while you're there for sure. Advent Devo. And then again, we'll check out the show notes page. Make sure you subscribe and all that jazz. And we'll see you in the next episode.
All right, brother.
Peace out.
See you, man.
Later.
Thanks for listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast at www.thelongerhaul.com.